So on the agenda for tonight is basically just the overview of the proposed management plan for the Minam River Wildlife Area. We'll get started off with some background. In the interest of time, we're going to cover the background on the property itself and on the acquisition, but we're not going to have time to dive into the area's rich history. This is an area that I'd highly recommend downloading the plan and reading some of the really cool history about ancestral use on the area from the region's indigenous tribes and including our 20th century settlers as well. Once we get through the background, I'm going to pass the baton over to Dan. He's going to cover the agency's vision for the Minam River Wildlife Area and some of our management goals that support that vision. Those goals relate to topics such as connectivity, habitat protection and enhancement, recreation opportunities, and administration of the area. We'll talk briefly about how we plan to implement this plan, and then we'll finish up on how to provide feedback. I expect the presentation to take around 30 to 40 minutes, and so hopefully we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes if folks out there have any questions or comments they want to share over the webinar. Next slide. So I see a lot of local names on the presentation tonight, but just in case there's folks that are tuning in from afar, other parts of Oregon later, the Minam River Wildlife Area is located halfway between La Grande and Enterprise, just south of Highway 82. And the map on the right kind of shows that little inset up top shows the Minam Wildlife Area in blue amongst all the region. And then the focus map there has a little bit more of the detailed map and surrounding property ownership. This wildlife area does lie within both Wallowa and Union counties, and it's bounded to the south by the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest and the Eagle Cap Wilderness, to the north by the Minam State River Wildlife Area and the wild and scenic Wallowa-Grand Ronde River systems. So Dan will talk a little bit more about connectivity, but I think what I'm trying to make a point is up front is just the role that this property plays as a keystone in regional connectivity for wildlife. A couple of the important features that I want to point out, and one is the wildlife area's namesake. That's the Minam River. The Minam River flows through the wildlife area along its western side. The Minam River on its own is an amazing natural resource and is now, with this acquisition, entirely within public ownership, which is an achievement that we're really proud of with this. Along the Minam River is the historic Minam River Trail. It is the lowest elevation point for access to the Eagle Cap Wilderness area, so it provides access to the wilderness area a year round. On the southern end of the wildlife area, at the higher elevations, is our forested habitats, and those eventually kind of give way to these long finger-like ridges that extend from south to north towards the northern boundary of the property, which includes some incredible grassland and canyon ecotypes. Talk a little bit about access points to the Minam. Of course, as I mentioned, the Minam area can be accessed right off of Highway 82. And so it's really accessible to all different types of users. We also have property boundaries shared, as I mentioned, with the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest. And so on the south side there, we have access points from the National Forest. Along the eastern boundary of the property is Deer Creek. And along Deer Creek is what is referred to as the Big Canyon Road. And the Big Canyon Road allows access along the eastern side of the Minam River Wildlife Area. And then also, as it goes onto the forest, allows access to the south access of the property at Alder Springs. We also have, not to be confused with the Deer Creek Road, which is at the very, very northern tip of the Minam River Wildlife Area. That is a county road that allows access to what we call Keystone, which is also local dialect for the Deer Creek Road. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about why ODFW acquired this property and what values we saw in this property. Generations of wildlife biologists in Northeast Oregon have recognized the importance of this property for big game winter range. As I mentioned before, given its regional location, it's a really important wildlife migration corridor. And so our intention was to protect not only public access to this landscape, but also as it was being sold off, we wanted to combat that threat of subdivision. And this area could have been divided up into more than 60 different parcels at one time for trophy homes or for private ranches. And so we wanted to address that and maintain these incredible wildlife and habitat values. With that, we also saw a lot of opportunities to help manage elk distribution in the region. As many of you on the call know, one of our largest challenges with wildlife management is elk distribution on private lands, especially. So by acquiring this really critical winter range and then managing it to support holding elk on it longer, we're hoping to reduce the impacts of elk distribution on private lands, both in the Grand Ronde and Wallowa valleys. As I mentioned, this landscape also has a lot of high functioning habitats that we have an interest in protecting, and then also some habitats that have been limited by historic land use that we are looking to work with our partners to help enhance. Move to the next slide. So this map shows the different phases in which we acquired this Minam Wildlife Area over several years. The genesis of the Minam River Wildlife Area began way back in 1967 when the ODFW, at that time the Oregon Game Commission, purchased about 441 acres along the lower reaches of the Minam River. And that originally served as public fishing access and secured the Minam River Trailhead that I mentioned in public ownership, which is located at Wildlife Flats, a part of the property that's just off Highway 82. Now, because the area was recognized for its importance as big game winter range, its ecological richness, and recreation opportunities, ODFW has attempted multiple acquisitions of the property from various landowners for more than 50 years. But it finally came together with a partnership between Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, ODFW, and Manulife, starting in 2021, when about 4,600 acres was acquired in phase one. The meat of this purchase was phase two, which was just under 11,000 acres, which was completed in 2023 in the green there. And then in 2024, we acquired an additional just over 1,000 acres on both the western side of the property, near where our local access point that we call the Green Gate on the Minam Grade, in addition to a parcel on the eastern front of the property. So in total, the Minam River Wildlife Area is over 17,000 acres, which is a really sizable chunk of landscape. And we'll go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, the partners for this effort were ODFW as the agency that has now taken ownership of this property. Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and their exceptionally talented staff helped us with the acquisition process. And then Manulife, previously known as Hancock, were the sellers. And together, the three of those partners worked together to make this happen for the people of Oregon and for the wildlife of Oregon. The funding came from several different sources. One of the larger sources was the Forest Legacy Program, which is a farm bill program that was started in 1990 to protect environmentally important forest lands that are threatened by conversion to non-forest uses. We also utilized the Pittman-Robertson Act, which is also known as the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Act. It's a law going back to 1937, for those of you who are not familiar with it, that provides funding for state wildlife agencies to support wildlife restoration, management, and research, as well as hunter education and public shooting range construction. These funds come from federal excise tax on firearms, ammunition, and archery equipment. And then we had a lot of really generous private donations. And I just want to highlight a few of the organizations that contributed from a private donation standpoint. Was Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, our local Union Wallowa County chapter of Oregon Hunters Association, and Wild Sheep Foundation chapters in Minnesota and in Oregon made some really generous donations to this acquisition as well. Since we're talking about support, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge a very special person whose support was really instrumental in making this possible, the late Susan Roberts, who was a county commissioner throughout this acquisition period. She actually grew up running all throughout this property that is now known as the Minam River Wildlife Area with her brothers. And it really was her clear love for this area. And her enthusiasm to see it protected was critical. And I don't think this would have happened without her. So just want to take a moment to recognize Susan and her contribution to seeing this become a reality. Go to the next slide. So What I want to cover on this slide is really the purpose of our wildlife areas at a broad high level. And so ODFW owns and manages more than 200,000 acres of public land on 20 unique wildlife areas across the state. Considering that the loss of natural habitat poses the greatest threat to native fish and wildlife, and acknowledging that that loss is further accelerated by climate change, these wildlife areas play a critical role in achieving ODFW's mission. So we acquire these properties for a variety of purposes that include, but are not limited to, protecting lands and water for wildlife habitat. You know that a lot of our wildlife areas have helped in alleviating human-wildlife conflicts, such as elk damage. These lands preserve Oregon's heritage, not just from a landscape perspective. I mean, these wildlife areas that are across the state they're like little microcosms of all the unique ecosystems that make Oregon what it is, not to mention how Oregonians enjoy and experience these wildlife areas. And so a lot of these lands also provide access for recreation and outdoor experiences. So for each wildlife area, of course, we write a management plan. And for the following purposes of providing our staff clear direction on how the agency expects these lands to be managed. We want to communicate our priorities transparently to the public. And then we want to be consistent in long-term management, knowing that we have staff turnover. We want staff, whoever's working on that wildlife area, to be able to reference a document that really lays out our commitment to these lands and our goals for it. And then the document finally provides a foundation for fiscal management of the wildlife area and helps leverage funds for habitat improvement projects across these lands as well. So we'll go to the next slide. And I think this is where I'll pass the presentation over to Dan Marvin, and we'll let him take it over from here.
Great, thanks. Evening, everybody. So for folks who aren't aware of how management plans are structured and for our wildlife area purposes, wanted to include this brief slide on how the plans are organized. This is kind of the general approach across all the plans for the wildlife areas that they represent. And so there is a slight difference with the way that we've organized our plan. It's still based on a vision supported by goals, objectives, and strategies. But you'll see that we've broken out a lot of the supporting information as appendices, and those are posted separately. So what we did is we basically took the meat of the plan, which is these primary topics, and put them in one portion, and then have appendices to that with the supporting information. And so just to kind of give everybody a quick idea of what each of these topics is about. So the vision is an overarching long-term outcome. That is the agency's ideal for this property, for the long-term purpose, and what we hope to see this particular property become in the future. That vision is supported by goals. Each goal is kind of its own standalone. Generally, they're a broad qualitative statement about the future conditions, and those goals are each supported by an objective and of what ODF&W plans to achieve and how they're going to support those goals. And then we get down into the strategies, and those are our implementation actions, and those are how we incrementally achieve our objectives that support the goals that execute the vision for the wildlife areas. And so the vision statement for the Minam is protect, enhance, and promote landscape level connectivity and ecological functions that provide high quality, resilient habitats for terrestrial and aquatic species for use and enjoyment by present and future generations of Oregonians. And that's a bit of a mouthful, but it speaks to the purpose of the wildlife area and its conservation value and why it was such an important parcel of property for ODF&W to obtain and now have in our management capacity. What it does is it conveys the basis of of our focus here, which is going to be at an ecosystem level management approach. It focuses on the nature of ecosystem drivers. We're going to, which out here is primarily climate, fire, and flooding events. And this also allows for what we're considering as a surrogate level, surrogate to those natural drivers, which is active management and a working landscape approach to management on the Minam. So goal one for the Minam Wildlife Area is to protect and enhance connectivity at a regional and local scale in a manner that supports critical ecological functions for fish and wildlife species. Really, this goal reinforces that vision statement. It recognizes that the importance of this parcel on the landscape, how this is regionally this parcel of land connects not only the Blue Mountains but the Wallowa Mountains. It takes into consideration the high habitat values, the critical species that are present on this wildlife area, from ESA listed fish, species of wild swap species, which was the original Oregon Conservation Strategy species and habitats, and other iconic flora and fauna, particularly elk and others. So for this goal one, our first objective is 1.1, protect large and small scale connectivity among important habitat types by enhancing movement of terrestrial wildlife across the wildlife area. And in the nature, or in the hopes of saving a little bit of time, we didn't develop a slide for each of the supporting strategies, but I would encourage you to take time to read through the plans and actually look at each one of these strategies that supports the objectives. But what I'll do is I'll quickly kind of generalize the supporting strategies for each one of these. And so some of the primary strategies for this objective are rules and regulations that help protect this area on a large scale. From a connectivity standpoint, ODF&W will look to remove barriers, whether it's fences that inhibit elk movement, or culverts and other road blocks that could inhibit fisheries as well. Habitat improvement, of course, is going to be a huge focus of the wildlife area and the management plan. For this particular management plan, like I discussed just briefly, a working landscape is a very large part of our management objective. And then collaborating not only with within ODF&W, within our biology, with our different biologists, but also with our neighboring landowners, federal and state and county partners, to be able to enforce rules, implement projects, and source funding to be able to accomplish the goals for the wildlife area. So then objective 1.2, protect and enhance connectivity among 187 miles of perennial and ephemeral streams and drainages, including 9+ miles of the Minam and the Wallowa rivers. As Jeff mentioned earlier, the entirety of the Minam River is now in public ownership and conservation and preservation, which is a huge milestone and something has long been a goal for the agency. And so supporting that objective again is rules and regulations that will help us protect those resources. Restoration efforts, whether it's in-stream or riparian restoration efforts, removing barriers, and again, that collaboration. And this will be a reoccurring theme throughout the rest of the remaining goals and objectives. And so you'll see these same strategies come up again. So real quick, I wanted to tip my hat to one of our staff. You'll see throughout the management plan a lot of these really nice figures and maps, and our senior tech for the wildlife area, Connor Sturmer, is the one who created these, and he's done a great job helping us put this together as well. And so as we transition to goal 2, wanted to provide an overview of the habitat distribution and the relative acreage and abundance of each of those within the wildlife area, just to show, really depict for folks where these are at and how they're positioned on the landscape. Kind of an overarching theme for goal 2 in the habitat restoration is that, ODF&W is focusing to restore and enhance habitats that are limited in their capacity due to either historic uses and anthropogenic impacts, and then 2, using those restoration techniques to build resilient habitats, particularly in the face of ever-changing climates and climate change resiliency. So as a way to break up the 17,000 plus acres of wildlife area into parts that are manageable from a digestible from a management approach, we've developed essentially 4 habitat units, and within those there's a total of 12 subunits, and these are based on physical and administrative and operational characteristics. So they're based on ridge lines or streams, or in some cases fence lines and barriers where we see an opportunity to have a clean break on a management scale. And a lot of these are, like I said, grazing pasture boundaries, and they include up to 12 subunits. And primary purpose for doing this is to break the landscape into more manageable sections. For us, it's going to help us convey projects to our funding partners and kind of make it a little more digestible when it comes to implementing things on the ground. And so if folks want to read more about this, Appendix A has a breakdown of the actual percentages of habitats that are within each one of these HMUs. It also gives a description of the boundaries and kind of how they're broken out. All right, so goal 2, actively manage the Minam River Wildlife Area for high quality and resilient terrestrial and aquatic habitats that supports diverse fish and wildlife species. And this goal is getting into the crux and the meat of what we're looking to accomplish from a on the ground perspective, and how we're looking to manage the property, and the goals and objectives we're trying to achieve with that. Our focus from a management standpoint is an ecosystem-based multi-species approach. We're looking to try to also, where necessary, tailor our management to specific species, and those may be species of wildlife concern, ESA listed species, but as a larger picture, try to manage on a multi-species approach. And so to accomplish that, we're focusing this on a working lands approach. So within that, the objectives are structured such that management, like objective 2.1, manage and enhance 9,000 plus forested acres to create and maintain habitats to support ungulates and other wildlife. The strategies that are tailored to this particular objective include including continuing our long-standing agreement, an interagency agreement with the Oregon Department of Forestry that provides ODF&W with all of our forestry management and fire and protection approaches. The goal is to manage for healthy forests, promote sterile vegetation that supports a broad range of wildlife, including elk. We're putting a particular emphasis on managing ponderosa pines forests for old, larger stage stand structures, mixed conifer forests, and also the application of prescribed fire when and where it's appropriate, and then as particular sites and areas might need, also includes planting and control of planting native vegetation or beneficial vegetation and controlling noxious weeds. Objective 2.2, manage and enhance 5,000 plus grassland and 200 plus sagebrush acres to benefit ungulates and other wildlife. Grasslands within the wildlife area constitute about 36% of the area. And the strategies that we're hoping to, looking to apply in support of this objective, are once again conditioning forage. This is really leans into that active working lands approach. So tailoring a grazing program that can help us accomplish that. Also developing and adjusting grazing infrastructure that is beneficial for achieving this purpose. So, really taking a deep dive and assessing fencing, what's beneficial, what's not. Can we remove some on the ground? Looking for alternatives. May it be virtual fences. Looking at where do we and how do we develop water and other resources for both cattle and the grazing program, and also for wildlife purposes. Again, weed control. The folks that are familiar with the property probably know that there's this fairly significant invasive grass species infestation on the wildlife area. So that'll be a major focus of some of the activities. And then again, planting vegetation, beneficial vegetation, native vegetation that will benefit fish and wildlife species. And then as it may or may not apply, really entertain the idea of prescribed fire within these habitat types. Objective 2.3, protect and enhance. Objective 2.3, protect and enhance 1,000 plus acres of riparian habitat and approximately 200 miles of rivers and streams. The strategies and approach to that would be to really assess stream habitat and stream habitat restoration, both in stream and riparian, looking to protect and enhance those habitats through barriers, to a possible grazing program, planting native vegetation or beneficial vegetation, and then of course also invasive species control. So one of the other major goals for the wildlife area and purposes in the acquisition when ODF&W discussed buying this property or working to acquire this property was the recognition of the long-standing recreational pursuits that have occurred on the wildlife area and on the property prior to ODF&W's ownership, and for years, for centuries, if you include tribal activity out on this property as well. And so along with the connectivity and the habitat goals, recreation is going to also be its own standalone goal. Part of that is, considering and promoting the exceptional exceptional recreational activities that are already there, and also considering others that align with goals 1 and 2 and work within the Division 8 agency rules for the wildlife area. And so listed here on the screen, there's multiple activities that are currently occur. I mean, hunting has been a longstanding activity. Fishing, hiking, not only the Minam River Trail has considerable use, but also the roads and trails throughout the property that convey access to the area. Wildlife viewing, photography, traditional foraging, working with our tribal partners and others to be able to access the property for those traditional uses. And then we're also looking at camping opportunities within the wildlife area, and would encourage folks' feedback on that topic. That leads us to goal 3, and which is to provide access and a variety of recreational opportunities to a diverse array of users in a manner compatible with goals 1 and 2. Like I said, the area has an extremely rich history of recreation, and where it's complementary to wildlife and habitat enhancement, that is a goal that ODF&W is looking to continue and promote. One of the primary rules that has been in place is a way to protect wildlife and will be considered as part of this objective is the winter range closure that occurs December 1 through March 31st annually to the wildlife area, with the exception of the Minam River Trail, which is open year-round to access. So the pursuits that we will look to work on will have to work within that particular rules as far as for protecting winter range and elk on the winter range. So objective 3.1, provide recreation opportunities for visitors and with diverse interests and abilities in a manner that is compatible with goal 1 and 2. And so those strategies include hunting and trapping, fishing. We're hoping to incorporate and invite a large contingency of citizen science and working with our partners. Then also a host of the non-consumptive type recreational pursuits from photography and hiking and horseback riding, as well as educational, and then also working with our tribal partners as possible. Objective 3.2, enhance and maintain access points and infrastructure that supports recreational opportunities listed above, and objective 3.1 in a manner compatible with goals 1 and 2. This basically is recognizing and developing strategies for maintaining and supporting our points of access, maintaining trails and infrastructure, maintaining the Minam River Trail and access to that trail year round, and also as a long-term objective or strategy to this objective would be to work with Oregon Parks and others to develop a suspension bridge that allows for year-round access to that Minam River Trail. So as I had mentioned previously, ODF&W is considering camping on this property. Currently, camping is not allowed on the Minam River Wildlife Area, but through this process, we're looking to consider rules that would allow some form and level of primitive camping, particularly for those that use the property for hunting, the access to the Minam River Trail and Minam River floaters, people that float the river. We'll take the information and the feedback that folks provide and weigh that with the risks and benefits and how that works with the goals 1 and 2 as well. And so really looking for folks on their feedback and hope to get some creative ideas to help us guide process. So goal 4, this is the last of our goals, is kind of the administrative goal and how we support and run the wildlife area. Essentially, without the administrative side of this, we'd just be, in limbo. So we've really tried to call this point out and recognize that this is a necessary process to support the function and operation of the wildlife area. So objective 4.1, administer wildlife area programs to maintain and enhance the facilities, structures, infrastructure, and equipment to conduct the habitat management and the public access projects that we've discussed already. The objectives, the strategies connected with this objective include staff that oversee and manage the PR funding and grant application each year that is used for the operation of the wildlife area, that pays for staffing, covers the cost of our facilities, and helps us implement the first 3 goals as they were laid out. And then objective 4.2, preserve the history of the Objective 4.2, preserve the history of the Minam River Wildlife Area through compliance with all pertinent laws, regulations relating to cultural resources. As Jeff alluded to at the top of the meeting, this property has a very rich history from a tribal standpoint. It holds a great significance for many tribes that were in this area. And so as part of our funding mechanism, we are actually going to conduct and complete a comprehensive cultural resource survey of the entire project, so that we have an informed basis for developing projects and working on projects and recognizing and respecting where those cultural locations are and protecting those in perpetuity as we move forward. And so the last part of this is plan implementation. And of course, funding, we've discussed. PR is a huge PR funding through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is a huge part of this. Not only did they help secure the property, but then they also support the administrative operation of the wildlife area. And so along with PR, our state and grant funds that include hunting and fishing license dollars, and also private funds and volunteer assistance as well. Implementation also is based on the staffing. And so for this particular property, there's a fish and wildlife manager, myself, and then also 2 others, a fish and wildlife senior technician and a fish and wildlife technician that they do all the boots on the ground work. They're the guys you'll see out there doing a lot of that work. And so, this doesn't happen without them. Then we also have our union and Wallowa County ODF&W staff that assists with surveys and other activities, restoration work within the property, as well as our numerous partnerships, including Oregon State Police that help us with the enforcement of rules and regulations on the wildlife area, agencies including state, federal, county, and all the local agencies, our tribal members and tribal partners, NGOs, private landowners, and of course, individual volunteers who come and assist us with operation of the wildlife area. And so last but not least in the plan implementation is the adaptive management and monitoring portion of this. So course, all these rules are not set in stone. This is a flexible or goals, excuse me. This is a flexible approach to the long-term management of the property and the wildlife area. We'll evaluate and develop different types of monitoring techniques and different plans for vegetation monitoring, fish and wildlife, individual species monitoring, habitat monitoring. They'll include a formalized protocol, photo points, and other strategies to be able to record and observe and record how the actions that we've taken are affecting the landscape, and then being able to shift and change as necessary. And one part of the management plan process is that every 5 years, we will revisit the plan to assess what isn't working, can make some tweaks. And then every 10 years, review the plan in its entirety and determine if it's being a success or if there's things that need to be adjusted. So as I alluded to at the top, we've developed this plan in a little bit different process than other wildlife area plans, where we had the main body of the plan as the goals and objectives, and then a lot of that supporting information we broke out in individual appendices. And so if you're looking for more of the details on the different habitat types or the habitat management units, I would direct you to the Appendix A. And in the back of that appendix is also a list of the different plant species that you'll find in the wildlife area. Appendix B is a good overall discussion and description of the wildlife that are present and at the back of that appendix is also another table with all the different species, their occurrence, and their frequency. Appendix C is just a good background on the history of ownership throughout the wildlife area and obligations, legal obligations that ODF&W as a landowner of this property has. And then last but not least, Appendix D is our rules and regulations that govern the wildlife area. So those include our Division 8 rules specific to wildlife areas. All right, Jeff, turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Dan. That was a lot of information to cover. And it was and it wasn't, because I understand that probably this was like a flyover of our goals and objectives of the wildlife area without getting it really into the meat and potatoes of maybe some of the strategies on how we're going to do that. And so we acknowledge that it probably was not realistic to go through all that in a 1 hour webinar, and we don't want to keep you from your evening any longer, but we do want to use that as a teaser to download the plan, dig into some of the things that you're interested in that may have piqued your interest during this presentation, and submit comments and feedback. And so how you do that, that's what we're going to cover on the last slide here. So the plan and all the appendices that Dan has been talking about are posted on our Minam River Wildlife Area visitors page on our myodfw.com site. The link is there in right underneath next to the fish icon. But in addition, if you're live or you're watching this on a recording, you can also use your cell phone to scan that little QR code in the upper right-hand corner of the slide here, and that'll take you right to that visitors page where there's links for the PDF documents. And the plan itself, the main body of the plan, is the one that's labeled public review draft, and then you'll clearly see the appendices listed in there. So once you've had a chance to review the plan and consider some questions, some comments, some feedback for us, we have 2 different venues in which you can provide input. One is by emailing us. We have a general email box set up at minam.plan@odfw.oregon.gov. The link is there on that bottom box. And then we also have a what we call a WUFU, or like an online intake form as well that you can click on, and that'll submit your comments. So and what we would just want to let you know, most importantly, is that this webinar and today kicks off our 30-day review period. And so we will want to see your feedback by Friday, 10/17 by close of business. And we can't guarantee that anything provided after that will be included as we go ahead and finalize the plan. And with that, Dan, we can just go to the last slide there. And just want to say thank you for your attention and your engagement. We've got about 15 minutes, so I'd like to open it up to questions or comments. So a few things. So again, we have an open meeting here. So raise your hand to be recognized if you have a question or a comment. We'll be able to track the order of which people raise their hands at. Once you're recognized, turn on your camera if you choose and unmute your mic. Please state your name. And then after speaking, just turn your mic and camera off and let somebody else go. And if you prefer, we could also type your question into the chat and we'll address those chat questions as time permits. And with that, I think we'll go with Mr. McDonald. I see you had your hand up first. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, I have I think it's a 2 or 3 part question, but part of it, the initial part is, are there bighorn sheep on the property?
We've got a couple of other wildlife staff that, John, do you want to take that one, history of wildlife sheep on the property?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, John Poston. I'm the Grand Ronde Watershed Wildlife Habitat Biologist based out of La Grande. Currently, there is not bighorn sheep on the property. Historically, there have been bighorn sheep that have utilized the property at different time frames. Late 90s, there was a release in the Upper Minam. I believe it was in February when that release occurred, and those sheep did migrate downstream and spent a fair amount of time on the portion of what is now the wildlife area. So historically, yes, there has been use, but current populations, no. It is well within bighorn sheep habitat. So there is an opportunity there for them to exist. There is subpopulations of that Bear Creek herd about 8-9 miles upriver from the easternmost boundary of the wildlife area. So certainly could see some habitat there.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question is that if there are sheep there, wild sheep, we really need to make sure that we do as much as we can to isolate any pack goats or grazing sheep on the wildlife refuge, because that's the death knell for the wild sheep. And I just hope that it's flexible enough if we have to start seeing wild sheep, that we can move quickly to isolate them from the domestic sheep and goats. And that's all I have.
Yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate that. And I also want to make a mention, if I didn't already, that we will do our best to remember some of the comments and questions that we are provided right here live on the webinar. But just to make sure that your input gets included, I would highly recommend that you still submit a comment through the email or that intake form online, just to make sure that we don't forget to include that. But John, that's a great comment. Thank you. Moving on to Mr. Tody. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff and Dan, for the presentation here. So we'll be submitting our comments and thoughts and input, as you probably guessed here already, and we'll get those put together. But there's some detail type questions that we don't have time to go through here tonight, and I'm wondering about the best way. Should we send those directly to Dan or just use this Minam email that was on the last slide? What's the best way to get some of these detailed questions answered so we can provide better sets of comments and input for you?
Yeah, Mike, you can use the Minam plan email if you like. But if you want to just have a chat offline sometime within the comment period, I think there's several of us, including myself, that'd be happy to help with some of those details before you guys submit for comments to make them efficient as possible.
Okay. Yeah, we'll probably take you up on that, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. And moving on to Mr. Akinson. Hi, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. Great presentation, you guys. This is really an excellent looking plan. Obviously, it's going to be tweaked over time, I'm guessing, particularly as you get some of our interest group input. And a couple of my questions were covered already by John and Mike. But in regards to bighorn sheep, I do believe there was a radio collared sheep that was technically on the property 2 or 3 years ago. So it, obviously they do occur. Kevin Martin said it had moved up the Grand Ronde River, up the Wallowa to the area. That's just a footnote. On I guess a little bit larger scale, have you given thought to having an advisory council of scientists, NGOs that have particular interests, such as ours at Oregon Hunters Association? That's sort of an approach. I know it's probably not typical in ODFW management area management, but this is a pretty unique situation, pretty complex, really, from a lot of different angles, and also somebody on the fisheries side of interest. That's just a thought, and we can integrate that into our comments. And then on monitoring, how well developed is that strategy at this time, or is it something that's going to come together as time progresses, would you anticipate? Because that's kind of a big one, species monitoring.
Yeah, I'd say more of the latter than the former, Jim. I mean, monitoring, of course, is limited by staff capacity and resources. And so I think that is probably one way in which we can work with our partners to, help us with some capacity on monitoring. But really what we're going to be looking at is outside of our big game population monitoring, which takes place at the district level, we'll be looking at project level monitoring for project level effectiveness, weed spraying, habitat treatment, that kind of thing. And go from there. So I think that's going to kind of be, the monitoring is kind of tied to what kind of work that we can put on the ground, more or less is what I'm trying to say. So the more projects we can get on the ground, the more need to monitor the effectiveness and efficacy of those projects.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Great job summarizing this. Good presentation.
Thanks for joining us. Is there anybody else with any questions, comments, feedback? Now'd be a good time. Not seeing anything in the chat either. So Dan, if you could just maybe roll us back to the how to comment slide, just so folks have one last look at that before we sign off for the evening.
You bet.
Great. So just giving folks a couple extra minutes before we give you 5 minutes or so your evening back. Again, go to our MyODFW, Minam River Wildlife Area Visitor Guide page. You can scan that QR link to go right to there. The public review draft is in a PDF format, along with all the appendices. We'll also go ahead and complete this recording and then post the recording on that page as well. So if you know of anybody that has an interest in the Minam River Wildlife Area and wants to see the presentation, please help us out by pointing them in that direction. We should have that up. Give us a few days next week and should have it up by the end of the week. And then please provide comment either through the Minam Plan email inbox there or through that intake form that's also there on the Minam Plan Visitors Guide. Not seeing any other hands up. I'm just going to thank you all again for spending part of your evening with us, and thank you for your support and engagement on the Minam River Wildlife Area. It's truly a historic piece of property, and we look forward to sharing it with you all and managing it in our best interests. Have a good night, everybody.